Good afternoon. My name is Brenda Suggett, and I'm the Executive Director of CARSP, and I would like to welcome you today to our webinar entitled The Road to Transportation Equity, Early Findings from Municipal Policies and Actions, plus an update on the ITE Canada CARSP 2023 conference. I should also mention that this webinar is a joint event. It was organized by both ITE Canada as well as CARSP. And I want to give a special welcome to those of you from ITE Canada who may not have been to one of our webinars before or know a lot about us, but we encourage you to learn more about our association. And the fact that we do have a series of free monthly webinars that we give to our members. And next week, we're actually hosting another webinar. This one is also a special one that we are co-hosting with Parachute. And that webinar is called Global Road Safety Actions 2023, What You Need to Know. It is going to be an update on the global plan for the Decade of Action, which we have provided previous webinars on. So it'll give an update on the global plan for the Decade of Action for Road Safety 2021 to 2023, along with tools coming out of the 8th Global Meeting of NGOs. And it's also going to provide some good materials to help promote the UN Global Road Safety Week, which is from May 15th to the 21st of this year. Today's webinar, the topic actually relates to our conference as well as a workshop that is after our conference, and our speakers will allude to that. Prior to introducing our three speakers today, I'd first of all like to get into some housekeeping. We invite questions throughout the whole time that the people are presenting, but we ask that you use the Q&A feature at the bottom. The questions will be answered at the very end after all three speakers have spoken. And now I have the pleasure of introducing our three speakers today. The first speaker is Victoria Barr. She is principal at Level Up Planning Collaborative Incorporated, which is a consulting firm that helps communities build health and equity into their policies and practices. She has 25 years of experience as a planner, advocate, and researcher, including work developing equity policies with municipalities. Joining her today is Tessa Williams, who is a registered professional planner that seeks to bridge the worlds of academia and practice in order to build more sustainable, equitable communities. As a research assistant at Simon Fraser University, and an intern with Level Up Planning Collaborative, she is contributing to research that aims to offer practical guidance for multi-sectoral professionals involved in planning, implementing, or advocating for sustainable transportation, and grappling with how to successfully embed equity in this work. She developed cross-jurisdictional transportation knowledge during her time in Nova Scotia, Ontario, and British Columbia, and welcomes opportunities to learn about communities from coast to coast to coast. And lastly, Mark Hearson. He is a transportation engineer with Stantec in their Winnipeg office. He brings 10 years of experience, primarily from consulting to provincial and municipal clients across Canada while working in a private sector. He is a demonstrated leader with an ability to account for a broad range of considerations in the areas of transportation engineering and planning, road safety, airport planning, investment strategy development, and asset management. He is executive member of the Transportation Association of Canada's Road Safety Committee, and he is co-chair of our ITE Canada CARSP conference, which will be in Winnipeg from June 4th to 7th. And without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to our first speaker, Victoria.
Thank you so much, Brenda, for that warm welcome and introduction. Good morning, everyone. And good afternoon to some of you. I guess it depends on where you are situated. Thank you again. My name is Victoria Barr. I'm pleased to be here today with Tessa Williams and many members of our research team to share some of our early learnings from our project about connecting transportation planning with equity. I will introduce the project to you and then hand the mic over to Tessa, who will describe the stages of the project in more detail and reflect on what we've learned so far. First, a land acknowledgement. I'm grateful today to be coming to you from the lands of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, specifically the Esquimalt and Songhees nations, also known as Victoria, BC. As a settler, I thank these nations for their continued stewardship of these beautiful lands and the ocean that surrounds them. Our challenge as professionals working in the transportation area is to always think about how we can embed not only equity, but also reconciliation into our work. Here in BC, Indigenous people are overrepresented in injury and death from motor vehicle crashes, and the provincial road safety strategy very explicitly highlights the unique challenges Indigenous peoples can face, such as long driving distances, inclement weather, and difficulty accessing driving training, not to mention the racism they experience, as well as other effects of ongoing colonialism. I encourage you to think about what this means in your own context and for your own practice. A little bit more about us. Brenda gave a wonderful introduction of who we are, but just to give you some sense of the different groups that we represent, this is a partnership between Level Up Planning Collaborative and Interact. So first, a little bit about Level Up. I'm proud to be the principal and co-owner of Level Up. Level Up Planning is a multidisciplinary consulting collaborative owned and operated by two women, myself and Leveline Sahota, who I think is listening in today. Our aim is to support organizations and communities across Canada to become healthier and more equitable. We provide high quality research and planning supports, including evidence reviews, policy analysis, community engagement strategies, and evaluation frameworks. With equity at the core of our work, we understand the importance of ensuring access and opportunities to healthy food, transportation, adequate housing, green space, economic opportunity, and input to local decision-making for all residents. We are honored to have supported several municipalities in Canada to integrate equity into their day-to-day planning work through the development of overarching equity frameworks, the use of equity-specific data, and through equity-focused community engagement processes. And let me just say that it's been a wonderful experience so far partnering with Interact on this project. I'll now explain who they are. The Interventions, Research, and Action in Cities team, Interact is the acronym, is a pan-Canadian collaboration of scientists, urban planners, public health practitioners, community partners, and residents studying the design of healthy and equitable cities. Since 2017, Interact has led an intervention research program involving cohort studies in 4 Canadian cities to evaluate how built environment changes influence health, well-being, and social connectedness. Using a mix of novel data collection methods, including mobile sensing, surveys, and interviews, Interact works closely with city partners to generate local data on the implementation and impact of their investments. Our ultimate aim is to address the urgent need for better evidence generated by and for communities that can guide local action and inform a national conversation on the design of healthier and more equitable cities in Canada. So just to give you some sense of the context or the rationale behind the project before we jump into explaining the project and give you some more information about our findings so far. So since 2020, attention on inequities inherent in city and community design has accelerated dramatically, including awareness of inequities within our transportation systems. Recent events, including the COVID-19 pandemic, crises linked to climate change and the Black Lives Matter movement, and the growing widespread recognition of the horrors of residential schools, remind us that not everyone in our communities has the same opportunities to be healthy and resilient. Inequities within and between communities are more obvious than ever. Those inequities lie at the root of many of the social and health challenges that communities face. Given this increased interest in embedding equity into planning, many Canadian municipalities are creating policies to guide their approach to equity, both internally and within governments and externally within their communities. The growing awareness is coupled with major government investments in building safer and more sustainable transportation systems in the face of the climate emergency and other mobility challenges. For instance, the National Active Transportation Fund is $400 million to be spent over 5 years for building and upgrading bike paths, pedestrian walkways and bridges, and nature trails. That's part of a greater $14.9 billion 8-year public transit plan unveiled by the federal government earlier in 2021. And finally, there's also political and policy momentum. For example, the Vision Zero approach is based on the premise that all people have the right to move about their communities safely. Equity is embedded within Vision Zero. So equity is becoming a guiding principle in more and more fields, including road safety. Equity and inclusion are now identified as key action areas in recognition of the wide-ranging impacts of transportation decisions and the need for fair distribution of road safety benefits and costs, particularly for disadvantaged or marginalized groups. So this is the key question that our project is trying to address. So through our extensive work with cities and as consultants and researchers, we've heard that the big question they now face is no longer whether or why to take action on transportation equity, but how, which is a much more difficult question. To tackle that question, Interact and Level Up Planning are leading case studies of cities making notable progress in their journey towards sustainable transportation equity. Our ultimate goal is reflected in the name of our project: Practices and Inspiration for Sustainable Transportation Equity, PEAST. To capture and share promising practices and inspiration about how cities can meaningfully embed equity in the planning, implementation, and evaluation of sustainable transportation interventions. We encourage you to find out more, and there's the website at the bottom of that slide. So the project has 3 primary objectives. The first is to conduct a policy scan to document equity frameworks, to understand how municipalities across Canada are developing high-level policies to guide their equity work. Number 2 is to develop case studies to capture promising practices for applying equity policies to sustainable transportation. Get closer to the ground to understand how municipalities are putting those high-level equity policies and practices, policies and frameworks into practice within the transportation realm. And finally, objective number 3, to convene researchers and practitioners to share lessons learned and establish a common agenda for advancing sustainable transportation equity in Canada. So cities doing this innovative work can learn from one another and then spread that learning far and wide. This is a very cool slide. I did not make this, but this is very cool. It gives you the idea of, this is like a project on a page, you know, it gives you some sense of the flow of the project so far. So our methodology is focused around examining the state of equity policies in Canadian cities, identifying jurisdictions that are applying these policies in sustainable transportation context, and delving into what worked, what failed, and why. I won't go through all of these steps. You can see them on the slide here, but you'll see that we've already done a scan of equity-focused frameworks and high-level policies, and Tessa's going to tell you about that in a minute. And we have chosen 3 cities to serve as case studies and conducted key informant interviews in each of those cities. At this point, we are now drafting the case studies. So it's great timing to have this webinar and the following workshop in June at this stage, because your questions and ideas will help to shape how those case studies are described and how our learning is shared in the final step of the project. Most of this work has been done so far by Tessa, who will now tell you a bit more about what we've been doing and what we've learned so far.
Thank you so much, Victoria, for framing our project so nicely. So now I'll get into sharing what we've found so far in this project. And I'd like to start by establishing some shared language about what we mean by equity in transportation and road safety. So the first point is that equity is not the same as equality. Equality means everyone gets the same treatment. And in the first image, we can clearly see that the same curve treatment does not work for everyone. So equity, in contrast, is about treating everyone the way that they want to be treated based on their needs. And so that's shown really well in the second image, where a variety of curb treatments help people navigate the space, from tactile markings to curb ramps. Equity is a big idea, so we look to scholarly literature for definitions more specific to transportation. And during the policy scan and the interviews with transportation professionals, I was probing for 3 different areas of equity. Firstly, I was interested in learning how practitioners were thinking about distributional equity and the sense of how transportation opportunities were distributed across different neighborhoods and social groups. In practice, this could look like mapping cycling infrastructure and overlaying it with census data to understand patterns in access based on neighborhood equity indicators like income. I was also listening for procedural equity, so how practitioners were making decisions and trying to make the way that they do their work more equitable. In practice, this could look like participatory budgeting, where municipalities share decision-making power with community. Finally, I was listening for recognitional equity, meaning how transportation professionals were positioning themselves and their work within historical power structures. So in practice, this could look like questioning who designed our existing data sets that have a strong focus on commuting peak periods and seeking data that better captures travel patterns that are not as well understood or recorded, such as those of caregivers and gig workers that tend to trip chain and travel off peak. When we think about equity, it's also important to consider the concept of intersectionality, which is an idea that was created by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, a Black female scholar that actually used road safety as an analogy to explain how inequity is the result of complex and overlapping systems of oppression. So just like crashes are typically the result of cascading effects from speed to inclement weather, you can't look at these factors in isolation. You need to consider how they interact to result in negative outcomes. So in Dr. Crenshaw's example, Black women experience both a combination of racism and sexism as they move through the world. So it's not enough to tackle these issues separately. We need to think about how they interact together. Cities are coming up with different ways to conceptualize how intersectionality and social identity translates into equity needs and barriers in transportation. And so this graphic is from the City of Toronto Capital Planning team, which created a transportation equity lens that names the different kinds of equity groups. And so you may already think about some of these groups in your work. For example, you can see here there's vulnerable road users such as cyclists and children. However, it's important to note that this isn't an exhaustive list, and these groups may look different depending on your community context. So across transportation, how we plan and design for the intersections between these groups is evolving. So for example, not all women have the same transportation needs. Although I'm a woman, I don't have the same travel needs as, for example, a mother who is new to Canada traveling with her young children. So this is an area to watch that requires further research and learning from community members with lived experience. So in summary, transportation is an intersectional experience, and there's a growing body of research to support this. For example, we know that structurally marginalized communities bear a disproportionate burden when it comes to road safety. This graphic, these maps, they're from a study completed by researchers who investigated child pedestrian motor vehicle collisions between 2010 and 2018 in Toronto. And what they found is that areas with higher proportions of material deprivation, recent immigrants, and racialized people were hotspots for collisions. And yet, these areas had less traffic calming. So if we apply the concept of intersectionality, we can start to unpack the reasons why these certain groups of people have higher exposure to traffic and experience more barriers to navigating local government processes to advocate for traffic calming. So what I hope this example shows is that, transportation and road safety are very much connected to some of these big systemic issues we are facing today as a society, from racism, colonialism, and poverty. So now that you understand how we're thinking about equity in transportation and road safety, I will share some Canadian communities and how they're using policies to advance equity at the local government level. I'd like to start by just sharing how we defined an equity policy, because when we started this project, it became clear very quickly that there's a wide variety of approaches to equity policies. we decided to narrow our focus and only look at policies that describe a local government's approach to improving the equity impacts of both internal processes and external activities. So both things that happen within the organization and activities that interface with the community. Even after we narrowed our scope, we still noticed that there's a lot of variety in the kinds of content in equity policies. And so some of the main content that I'll share with you today are frameworks, tools, and indicators. So some content looks at framing the problem and approach to solutions at a corporate level, while some content focuses on providing specific tools to evaluate the equity impacts of staff work. And others focus on creating indicators to help measure a baseline state of equity or inequity in a community. And this content can be packaged into separate policies or sometimes combined in one document. And so they work together and they evolve over time. There were 3 main steps to my policy scan. I started by compiling a long list of communities with equity policies. Then, as a team, we developed selection criteria to create a short list and do a detailed document analysis. This is the long list of policies that I found, and I think the exciting news is that this is just a snapshot in time, and it's growing all the time because we know more and more cities are creating equity policies and working towards this. So here I've highlighted our short list. We selected 8 cities for detailed review: Vancouver, Ottawa, Halifax, Edmonton, New Westminster, Victoria, Saskatoon, and Montreal. And our goal was to capture a variety of population sizes and locations across the country. This table summarizes the findings from our document analysis, and it provides an overview of the richness of key content areas so that people can identify policies for guidance. So, for example, if you are interested in learning how to define and apply the concept of equity when it comes to intersectionality, you might look at this table and see that Ottawa has rich content. And you might take a look at their policy to see how they developed data-driven profiles of equity-deserving groups to help staff better understand the community that they serve. Victoria and I summarized our learnings in an article for Plan Canada. And while this is a planning-focused publication, we think that it's extremely relevant for road safety and transportation professionals, given how interdisciplinary our field is. This is a summary of our suggested takeaways from practice, and you can read about it in more detail in the article, but for today, I wanted to highlight our suggested takeaway to ensure that equity reflects the local context. This is really important for road safety because our transportation systems are the result of historical policies where investments in infrastructure actually benefited some communities and harmed others through things like environmental racism. So in the 1950s and 1970s, we know that most North American cities proceeded with projects that divided communities and displaced racialized people in order to build new highways, and this was justified using the term urban renewal. So we all need to be mindful about the actions that led to some communities living with more exposure to traffic and therefore more road safety risks today. Another key finding from the policy scan is that these equity policies tended to be high level and they rarely spoke to transportation explicitly. So next we did a rapid review of recent transportation policies to understand how cities with equity policies were applying these to their transportation work. So what were transportation staff making of the equity policies? What did this mean when they went to do important policy exercises? And so what we found is that Edmonton, Ottawa, and New Westminster stood out as having rich equity policies, but also strong evidence of equity integration. So it looked like they were successfully applying some of these equity ideas to their transportation work. What we saw is that Edmonton did an intersectional analysis of the high injury road network. They also applied their equity policy to the engagement guidelines when it came to its bike plan. In New Westminster, We saw that equity was made a key consideration in the rollout of its electric mobility strategy and the AAA Transportation Network Plan. Finally, in Ottawa, we found that there were spatial equity indicators that were used to identify priority neighborhoods for transportation investments, and that equity is a cross-cutting theme in the new transportation master plan that is under development now. So I reached out to staff and consultants involved with these projects at each city, and we talked to them about lessons that they learned when they were trying to apply their equity policies to their work in transportation. And our goal here was to hear from a wide range of perspectives in terms of social identity, work experience, and different kinds of projects, because the transportation and road safety fields are so interdisciplinary. And the heart of these discussions was really talking about practical experiences when it came to trying to take action on equity in transportation, from engagement, design, and operations. And so with the remainder of my time, I wanted to share some of the specific ways I was hearing transportation professionals apply equity to road safety, based on the 15 interviews I've completed to date. And what I want to make clear is, like, this is the great work of other people and other folks who've worked very hard. I'm just here today sharing what I've heard and sharing these interesting lessons learned for everyone to learn. So the first project that I want to highlight is the Safe Mobility Strategy in Edmonton. One of the most interesting results was an analysis that compared which neighborhoods logged the most traffic safety inquiries with high crash neighborhoods. And so what you can see from this map is that some of the dark neighborhoods in the south that had high volumes of inquiries were not actually high crash neighborhoods, which are outlined in the pink and are more in the city center along the river valley. And so this analysis helped Edmonton rethink the reactive nature of their road safety processes and realize that some of the people most in need might be experiencing barriers to contacting the city. So this led to a push for more proactive processes that actually improve procedural equity and the way decisions are made around road safety. There is a great webinar actually hosted by ITE Canada, where staff from the city of Edmonton explain how they use the city's gender-based analysis plus process to ask reflexive, critical questions throughout the project and prioritize equity, if you're interested in learning more about this project. The next project I wanted to highlight is in Ottawa, and I know that road safety folks will be very familiar that collisions happen very frequently at intersections, and that this can be a pain point for cities that are trying to increase their cycling mode share. Because if you have really good quality infrastructure networks, it can all be for naught if there's dangerous intersections that don't have treatment that people can't navigate safely. So in Ottawa, we spoke with staff involved in the development of the protected intersection design guidelines that were published in 2021. And what we heard was that there is a strong focus on meeting the needs of vulnerable road users, such as people on bicycles, but also people with disabilities, such as vision, hearing, and mobility impairments. And so how they tried to achieve this is by doing site visits to existing intersections with members of the disability advocacy community to understand how these designs were or weren't working in real life. And so this was a practical, tangible step that the designers did to better understand the transportation needs of people that were different from them. And they also took the time to really celebrate this as a success of the project and a learning going forward. And my final example is from Surrey, which was not included in our research project because they don't have an equity policy at this time. But I wanted to share it in the webinar today to show that staff can take initiative on their own and take action on equity before there's a corporate level equity policy. And so in Surrey, staff created a new Vision Zero safe mobility strategy to guide them from 2019 to 2023. And this strategy included an explicit equity analysis when it came to crash distribution, highlighting how Indigenous, youth, seniors, and people with low income bear a disproportionate burden of KSIs. And they actually put in place policy to help prioritize neighborhoods experiencing inequity when it came to investments in traffic calming and countermeasures. Another area that seemed to be overrepresented in Surrey's analysis was neighborhoods with high proportions of newcomers to Canada. And so the city actually partnered with researchers at Simon Fraser University to do a project led by newcomer youth for newcomer youth that organized walking tours of key community destinations that shared road safety tips. And so this community-based participatory approach really celebrated the lived experience and expertise of newcomer youth who were well aware of the specific barriers that their community were facing, such as the fact that newcomer youth were often tasked with the responsibility of helping family members navigate transportation systems and act as their interpreters when they were learning a new language. And so Parachute is actually already did a great webinar on equity in Vision Zero, where you can learn more about Surrey's work. And there's webinars available online by the research team at SFU that shares directly from the newcomer youth all that they learned and all that they contributed to this project if you want to learn more. So I hope today has given you some ideas on how equity can be operationalized at all stages of road safety projects. And I wanted to share this quote just as a reminder that we all have a role to play in making our transportation systems safer and more equitable. I know that our transportation systems are becoming increasingly complex and our disciplines are becoming increasingly specialized. So I think it can be easy to think that equity is not in your area of influence, but I want to encourage us to all think about equity as an opportunity and a responsibility to try to do our work differently. And also to say that, we don't have to do this work alone. There's just so much more resources coming out and communities of practice of professionals and advocates and community members who want to learn about this and talk about this together. So if you found today valuable, I'd like to invite you to join us in Winnipeg for the joint ITE Canada and CARSP workshop. We're going to share more about our transportation equity case studies, and I'm excited to say that we will be joined from transportation professionals from Edmonton, New Westminster, and Ottawa. Together, we will lead an interactive workshop, sharing more details on our work, guiding participants through real-world scenarios that go through opportunities to apply equity strategies, and will collaboratively set an agenda for research on advancing equity and sustainable transportation. This is a great chance for you to have some hands-on learning after a lot of learning at the conference. We will make sure that this is as interactive as possible and as engaging as possible. It's also a great opportunity to meet your fellow practitioners who are on the front lines of trying to make transportation equity a reality. And you'll be able to speak directly to researchers and tell them what are the pressing issues in your practice and what kinds of data and support do you need from academia. While there is a cost to the workshop, there are waivers available if you need them. So just contact CARSP for more information on that. And so I'd like to end by thanking our funders and partners who made this project possible, as well as the rest of the research team, because there is a large group of us who are working towards this, and we all bring a different perspective that make this work better. So thank you, Megan Winters, Meredith Stones, and Jamie Fisher, to name a few, for all of your hard work. I'd also like to thank you for giving me your time today. I know everyone has very busy schedules, so thanks for listening in, and we look forward to hearing your feedback.
Well, thank you so much, Tessa and Victoria. Excellent presentation, great overview of your project and definition of what equity is and how it differs from equality, and just the scope of the project, and also the fact that it's so practical as well. It gets right down to that, where the rubber hits the road in terms of what they're actually doing and how it's impacting people. So really appreciate that. Thanks for that, that overview, and also for relating it to that workshop. And I just want to draw people's attention to a couple of links that have been added to the chat area. One is to the webinar that I mentioned at the beginning, and also another one is to the ITE webinar that Tessa had made reference to. And now I'm going to pass it over to Mark. And I just want to encourage people. I see some questions are coming in. Just to remind people to keep those questions coming into the Q&A, and we will answer questions about all three presenters at the end.
All right, thank you. And so now kind of another moment or word on the conference. So as co-chair of the Local Arrangements Committee, it is my pleasure to invite you to the joint CARSP and ITE Canada conference in Winnipeg from June 4th to 7th. Our conference will attract and showcase transportation professionals and students from across the country and beyond. This year's conference it represents the first time that the two organizations, CARSP and ITE Canada, have jointly held their annual conferences. This presents an opportunity for the two organizations and communities to exchange ideas and experiences in transportation and road safety, promoting safe transportation for all. The conference also offers a unique forum to share successes and learn how others in transportation and road safety communities are planning safe, sustainable, and equitable transportation solutions, much like what we were just hearing. So to reflect the organizational mandates of CARSP and ITE Canada, while also elevating timely discussions, we have developed a technical program centered on the theme, road safety, creating impact through diversity. We recognize that the provision of safe, sustainable, and equitable transportation systems requires integrated actions and policies to meet the needs of different stakeholders, including diverse users, as well as decision makers. Much of the technical program will focus on or touch on ways to enhance safety, sustainability, and equity in the face of complex and competing priorities, and as well as in a rapidly changing environment. To top it off, we feel very fortunate in that very few venues are better suited for these types of discussions than the Canadian Museum of Human Rights, pictured here on the screen. And we invite you to continue this conversation while exploring the museum, its corridors, and its exhibits during our Tuesday evening banquet. The conference brings together the best of both organizations, forming a program comprised of keynote speakers, panel sessions, workshops, and 4 concurrent streams of technical presentations. On the Monday morning of the conference, Megan Weir of the Oakland Department of Transportation will kick off the conference with a keynote address on partnerships to prioritize safety and equity. Tuesday's lunch will also delve into similar challenges and opportunities through a panel of notable voices discussing equity in transportation. And similar to past ITE Canada conferences, the program will also feature presentations not immediately related to the theme, including design, operations, and emerging technologies. For those unfamiliar with typical conference offerings from ITE Canada, the conference will feature the annual activities of the ITE Canada Collegiate Traffic Bowl and the Street Hockey Classic. The Traffic Bowl is a Jeopardy-style competition that pits students from ITE Canada student chapters against each other for the title of the Canadian champion. This year's street hockey game, which will take place on Memorial Boulevard, just in front of the beautiful Manitoba Legislative Building, and its Golden Boy statue, again pictured here, and is open to all. A student mixer typical for both conferences will follow the Traffic Bowl and Street Hockey Classic to cap off Monday activities. Winnipeg, in its summertime glory, will serve as the wider backdrop for the conference. The venue for this year's conference is Winnipeg's RBC Convention Center. That and the Delta Hotel are both located in the heart of Winnipeg's downtown, with many of Winnipeg's attractions and within walking distance. These include the Forks, the Manitoba Legislative Building, Canadian Museum of Human Rights, the Winnipeg Art Gallery, and the new Kalmiak Inuit art component to that, True North Square, Exchange District, and Union Station. Many of our technical tours will explore or pass by these attractions, including our many cycling and walking tours. And for those willing to venture outside of Winnipeg's downtown, Sinwing Park, the Leaf, and Canada's new diversity gardens shown here are well worth the trip. And so finally, with less than 2 months until the conference, please consider registration if you have not already done so. Although early bird registration has closed, there are still regular registration rates available until May 20th, and discounted rates are available for ITE Canada and CARSP members. And then finally, home to over 700,000 people, we like to think that Winnipeg is a big city with a small town feel. We're a friendly bunch, and we hope to welcome you to our city and see you all very soon. With that, I'll thank you and turn it back over to Brenda.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mark. A lot of great activities that are planned, and being one of the members of the organizing committee, it's been no small feat to plan this, but it's been very rewarding, and it's really shaping up the program itself. And very detailed information is available on the conference website, including the actual technical session presentations themselves. You can read up on the speakers, the different tours that he mentioned. So we invite you to go check it out. And just once again, the dates of the conference are June 4th to 7th. So yeah, we invite you to check that out. So now we are at the question period of our hour. And I'm going to start off with a question. I believe it's geared to Victoria. The question is, Victoria led off with a list of the factors that lead to Indigenous road users being involved in more injuries and fatalities. And one of the factors was racism. I'm not understanding where the connection is between the two, other than racism being a buzzword in equity-based discussions. So, I mean, that's open to either of you, of course.
I can't open my video. Can you allow that to happen? It gives me a note. I try to start my video and it says I can't because the host has stopped it. So can you start my video? Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, good.
Excellent. That's a really good question, and I'm glad that you asked it. It's part of it's a really huge question though, so I don't think we have a ton of time to answer it fully in depth. But let me just say that that racism is really one of the underlying factors that is a very strong factor that has an influence on health and well-being in all aspects of our society. It's a determinant of health. So it's understanding the day-to-day experiences of racialized individuals and Indigenous peoples, and listening to their stories, for me, has helped me to understand how racism is kind of embedded in many parts of our society, and how it affects people, and how it puts barriers in place for folks to be able to make enough money, or to be able to live in particular neighborhoods, that kind of thing. There's all these, we know from research actually that racism does play a part in many of the determinants of health. And just to say too, on a personal note, that doing this work is for me, has been a real learning journey and continues on. And I intend to do this until I'm dead, and continue that learning journey that just sort of never ends. As a white woman, I'm learning about how to recognize and name racism, and how to learn about my own unconscious biases, those stereotypes and assumptions, and how to question those. So being able to listen to folks and listen to their experiences and understand the power of racism and how it affects people's lives. Doesn't affect my life as a white person, but it affects a lot of other people's lives. And so doing this work and addressing equity is really important to be able to listen to that and learn from that and name it. Is really important. It's part of being a good ally, I think. It's also about learning about how racism and colonialism continues to affect a number of the different structures we have in society and the way we do things in society, including the way the decisions are made at City Hall, for instance. So those are the systemic racism elements that are important to get a handle on. Again, it's a learning journey. I have lots to learn still, and I'm grateful for that. And so I don't have all the answers by any stretch of the imagination, but just sharing with you a little bit of what I've learned so far.
Thank you so much, Victoria. Did you want to say anything, Tessa, or we'll just leave it there?
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Victoria, for being so honest with your answer, and thanks for the question. I think the only thing I would add is like maybe reflecting on like the history of why some First Nations and Indigenous communities are located where they are, and how sometimes they were forcibly relocated to these remote places, and that can be related to some of the things that the BC road safety strategy mentions, which talks about long driving distances, inclement weather. So some of those things are the result of historical like forced displacements, right, of where they ended up being able to settle based on where the government said they could settle. So that might be maybe a more tangible way to connect everything back. But I totally agree with Victoria that doing equity work is super humbling, and the more you listen and the more you learn, the more it's hard to see that things aren't connected at a bigger structural level. So I'll be thinking about your question for a long time. Thanks for asking it.
Okay, thank you so much. Great question. The second question is, are there any best practices for evaluation that municipalities have shown for capturing or reporting progress in integration over time? And they just made another comment. We know such aspects are important for accountability to residents and staff reporting to council for updates.
I can start with that one. Thanks, Brendan. Thanks, Manveer, for the question. I think that this is an area that is growing, and that's why it's such a great question, because I think staff and consultants and people who work with municipalities know that they need to work on this, but they're not necessarily sure how. I think from our case study cities, some promising practices that are emerging are using existing processes, such as staff reports that you mentioned, as a way of tracking equity impacts and reporting out on them. So, you know, for example, in Edmonton, in their staff reports, there is a gender-based analysis plus section that is required for staff to fill out. So you can be certain that every decision that goes before council will have some sort of discussion on equity impacts. And to your point, staff can look back on it and see how was this addressed in the past, what did we learn, and how can we build? So it kind of serves that two functions of one, accountability at a decision maker level and a community level, and then two, a resource for staff to return to see how equity work has taken place in the past.
Okay, perfect. Victoria, did you have anything to add, or you want to just leave it there? That's good. Okay, perfect. The next question is, someone's very interested in New Westminster, and you had mentioned that they were one of the case studies that you decided to delve into because they met your criteria that you were looking for. And this person wondered, what was New Westminster's application of equity?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. We haven't forgotten about New Westminster. We didn't include them in today's webinar because I was trying to focus on road safety specific examples. And I didn't have one that fit as well to that box as I would like. Not to say that New Westminster isn't doing great work with road safety, just didn't make it in today's presentation. I think some of the most interesting things that we're learning New Westminster is doing actually is around engagement and more experimental and innovative ways of going to community and hearing from people who are less likely to come out for traditional engagement formats. So that's not something that has to be specific to any type of transportation project. Engagement is an important part of all projects, no matter what we do. So I think that in our workshop and in our final case study report, we will dive into in more detail some of the ways New Westminster specifically is applying equity to their transportation work.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Victoria.
Oh, thanks, Brenda. Thank you. Just to add to that a little bit, Level Up did worked closely with a wonderful team at the City of New Westminster to put together the what's called the DEAR framework, which is the name of their equity framework. DEAR stands for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Anti-Racism. And it was a wonderful experience. So shout out to the City of New Westminster. They were amazing to work with. And it's an example of sort of the power of mayor and council at the time being very strong, like we really need this. And it just shows the political will can make a big difference in terms of connecting with some of the staff that were very on board as well, and trying different ideas and being creative and learning along the way. And so I just wanted to say that it was wonderful working with them on that. That being said, as Tessa mentioned, you don't necessarily, there's things that staff within particular cities can do even without an overarching equity framework. Tessa mentioned the city of Surrey earlier. And even if there isn't that high level political will, there's lots that staff can do to integrate equity within their work.
Great point. Okay, thanks for sharing that. So the next question I have is, what are the provisions made for peoples out of Canada and other countries about coming to the program? And I'm just wondering if that refers to the workshop, and I can answer that. It is an in-person workshop, if that's what you're referring to, as well as the conference too. So if you could connect with me individually, I can take this question offline. My email is info@carsp.ca. And so we'll get back to the questions for our speakers. Can we get the slides of the recording, please? And I should mention that this is being recorded and it will be made available on our website in the webinars area after, within the next couple of days, it'll be there. Now, in terms of the slides, I didn't ask you if you're okay sharing those. Are you comfortable with that? Okay, great, thanks. Perfect, all right. The next one is, have any municipal staff made mention of potential gaps in public engagement when interacting with underrepresented communities during planning stages of projects? And they furthermore added that during my municipal work, we have noticed a need to move this engagement to less of a checkbox to more meaningful and sustainable engagement. So pass that over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Brenda. And absolutely, Manveer, engagement is an area that is ripe for reimagining. And we're hearing that a lot from our city partners, that some of the things that we used to do just did not work for many people. And so there can be a danger of performative engagement for sure. That is kind of just done as a step in the process and less about actually hearing from the community. I think something interesting that we are hearing in our interviews is when we do spend more time on engagement and there is more resources and support to do more and better engagement, sometimes you can have actually burnout from communities where they're being asked so much all the time to provide their ideas. And so I think it's up to us as professionals who are getting paid to do this work. How can we make sure we're being efficient and meaningful and asking the right questions at the right time? And I don't think that there's necessarily a blueprint or a guideline you can follow to a T to make sure you're doing that. I think it just takes a lot of working with your colleagues, working with community organizations to make sure communication channels are always open and that you're engaging when necessary and when the most impact can be had on the project. And I know Victoria and Level Up do a lot of work with engagement. So I don't know if you want to add anything, Victoria.
Oh, thanks, Tessa. No, that was great. And I thank you so much, Manveer, for the question. It's a wonderful question. What we're learning is that, you know, an equity-focused community engagement strategy looks quite different than what we would normally think of as a traditional community engagement strategy. One of the ways that that we do equity-focused engagement is to first, instead of expecting people to come to us and kind of come to the table, we bring the table to them. So we don't do a lot of surveys. Because you know, there's research to show that the people who fill out surveys are often the most, you know, like privileged in our society, are privileged within the community, that people who have time and resources to be able to answer a survey. So we de-emphasize that, and we focus more on engaging directly and building relationships with folks in person if we can. So we spend a lot of time within communities, meeting people from various community-based organizations. If those organizations are having an event, we show up there and don't necessarily have a booth, but we show up there and try to connect with people as they're already connecting, instead of expecting them to come to a special event that we have planned. So sort of meeting people where they're at. It's also about respecting people's time. Again, if we're getting paid, then we need to find ways to honor people's time. And so we do things like we give out honorariums, we give cash honorariums, we provide food, we don't show up empty-handed ever, and make sure that we have things like childcare provided or transportation options if there's a particular thing that we're asking people to come to. So it's just like that sense of respect for people's time and the importance of relationship building, which can take quite a long time to do, but it's really important.
Thank you so much for that answer. And I was curious whether there's a process of providing information back to those groups in terms of how their information was used and what ultimately it enabled to happen, like in terms of an impact, if you want to comment on that.
Oh, go ahead, Tessa.
Oh, I would just say that, yeah, I think reporting back and it gets back to accountability, right? And making sure that you're letting community members know that what they said was listened to and what's going to happen with that information. It doesn't always mean that you're going to do exactly what has been asked, but you definitely owe an explanation as to what you are going to do and what you made of the information you heard. So yeah, reporting back is a really important piece that sometimes gets left behind.
And Victoria, did you want to add to that, or no? You're good. Okay.
So beautifully said. I can't. No, that was
perfect. Very good. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of our time. So once again, thank you to all three of you. Excellent presentations. You've really sparked a lot of questions, I think, in people's minds and interest, and inspired us to learn about this field more and better understand it. I know this project, it's got a lot of great learnings, but as you said, it's such a big field and we're all still kind of like learning in it and making our way through it. So, but thank you so much for presenting your method of better understanding how equity is being built into transportation policy and road safety programs. So this has been very, very insightful and inspiring. And thank you to all three of you. And once again, invite you to check out the conference as well as the workshop. And you'll see more of these two amazing speakers there at the workshop. So I invite you to do that. And thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.